Hey everybody, welcome to Pianist Academy. I am Charles Szczepanek. Good to see all of you here. Many of you here tuned in already. Welcome. I see Rhodsey is already in the chat. If you're here, drop a hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. That'd be great. Like I mentioned in the description, by the way, you can always check out the description below these videos for a little preview of if there's a plan of what we're going to talk about. That'll always be there in the description. And so today, we're going to be listening to Rhodsey play a little Chopin to get us started. And then the whole rest of the session, for the first time this year, we're going to have the whole rest of the session for just an open Q&A for everybody. Hello, Antonio. Hello, Dith. And hello, David. Dith, you said you're taking your first stab writing a choral piece. Lovely. I have a sweet spot for choral music. Definitely. Hello, Nancy and OCD King and Alan. Awesome. Welcome, Alan. So I was a little late in getting set up for this, so my screen to see all of the comments is like 5 feet further away than usual. Sue, welcome, Sue. Great to see you. So if you see me squinting, it's because it's almost like I'm reading like 9-point font. But I'm glad to be here. Why don't we... C Drive, welcome C Drive. Why don't we jump right into listening to Rhodsey play? Rhodsey, are you still here? I saw you say hello before we even got started, so hopefully you're still here. So Rhodsey is playing Chopin's Prelude in A major. Everybody, I think we all know that Prelude, right? Hopefully he's still here. We're going to take a listen along with Rhodsey's dog. Here we go.
Right, Scooby. Hello. You want to play some Chopin? Oh, I think he wants to hear some Chopin. All right.
All right, let's give Rhodsey a little round of applause in the chat. Nice work. In fact, we've heard a lot from Rhodsey in previous streams. If you've tuned in before, he is usually submitting original compositions, and I think this is actually the first time that we're ever hearing you play a classical piece of music. So, thanks for sending this in. It's going to be fun to chat about. Yeah, let's drop some applause in the chat. I haven't seen any yet, so I'm giving you some extra Rhodsey. Nancy, I think, said clap. Yes. Very nice. All right. Thanks, Alan. Nice applause there. Okay. Rhodsey, the very, very first thing that I want to talk to you about. So, I am a teacher. My job is to help you get better. I know that last time we talked 2 weeks ago, you were, I think, a little frustrated with my reaction. So I'm here to help you, and my job is to point out things that aren't going so well. So that's what we're going to talk about, Rhodsey. First step, the very, very, very first thing that I want to point out, I'm going to show this again on the video to really point out exactly what's going on. Thanks, David, and thanks, Dith. Is we've got some really, really flat fingers that we're playing with occasionally. So much so that it's to the point of sometimes being, I think it was in your left hand that we're going to rewind to, being so flat that we're actually playing with like the bottom of the whole finger here. Let me pull that up, Rhodsey, so you can see, and we can all see exactly what I'm talking about. Let's see. think I've got the best look queued up here. So, okay, we freeze framed. Rhodsey's left hand is the one that's behind on the screen. And if you look at your third finger, well, all of the fingers really, but especially third finger and your fourth finger in the left hand, they're super flat, right? So we end up playing, you're playing kind of all along from the middle joint of the finger all the way down to the tip of the finger. And I think it's on this chord. Maybe. I'm not exactly sure how you're executing that because I can't actually play the notes if the third finger is that flat. So, Rhodsey, we gotta get this bridge raised. Most of the rest of the time, this is looking really good because your bridge is in a better place. We have better posture with the hands, better positioning. Sometimes, though, in this rolled chord in particular, when you roll this, everything kind of goes bam, and it really collapses. We want to make sure, especially if we're rolling to save on the stretch in the hand, that everything, that the bridge stays elevated and strong, and the rest of the joints in the fingers stay curved. So even if we're playing a huge stretch, like this, and I'll show you from the top down, because sometimes we can play this this chord near the end without rolling. If you can grab the A sharp and the C sharp both with the thumb, right? But you can even see with this stretch, I think you can see, that things aren't totally flat. From the side, it'll be even easier to see. The fifth finger, while it looks like it nearly is, flat would be down, but it has just that little bit of height, right? So even when we're stretched to our max, we want to be sure that we're not playing with those middles of those fingers. So those spots, Rhodsey, where you're, go back and rewatch the video, and you'll see exactly all the ones that I'm talking about, and this one in particular. Anytime we have a tendency to drop the wrist and collapse the bridge, and all of a sudden we're playing on so much more of the finger, let's remind ourselves with the other hand, put the other hand. We can even start with just making a light fist and put it in the palm, so the palm is just cradling that. And remind yourself, lift your hand up by the palm and say, oh yeah, okay, I'm supposed to be here, not here, right? So even if we're stretched for a larger chord like this in the left hand, we still have plenty of curve in 3 and in 2, right? Okay, I pointed out one where it's especially bad, but take a look through all those, Rhodsey. Okay. Let's dive into a little bit of a different kind of talk. This Prelude, how many people here have played this Prelude before? I mean, it's such a famous one. I'm sure that many of you have. I think we may have even, like 2 years ago, heard Sir Wolseley play this, I think. David says yes. This Prelude is interesting in that it's almost like a quasi-mazurka. So it's kind of between, you could almost think of it like the introduction to Chopin mazurkas even. Because this octave, it's dance-like. So, and because of that quality of the music and because of the reference to another style of writing in this, I think it leaves the door open for a lot of different types of interpretation. So we could, while still obeying the dolce comment at the top of the page, sweetly, this could have more forward momentum. Yes. So making sure that we continue to really pay attention to each shape. So we know where the high point of each of these slurs is. So if we zoom in here, where do we push to within that phrase? Probably da-da-dum, either here or here, depending on our interpretation. One of those two. We're going to be pushing the phrase forward to that point. And then we taper. And then we do it again. Right? And even if we wanted to take, let's say, a slower tempo than this and really focus on the andantino marking instead of the allusion to the mazurka that we have here, we're still going to focus on creating shape through each one of those slurs. See, Johnny, you said you just started today. Nice. Good. So, shape. This is the big theme right now we're talking about. Shape. And where else? We talked about shape, finding that in the phrase. So, knowing where the phrase pushes to. But there's another really interesting thing. In amazingly, such a simple, 16 measure piece, we have a lot of opportunities to show additional shape and even more color. Because the downbeat of many of these measures, so we're looking at this one, and that one, and even that one, and then again later, and here, and there. Sure. All of those are places where we are creating dissonance. This is measure 1, 2, 3. 3, first line. Of course, if we played that by itself, we can really hear what that dissonance is. Sometimes I think when we play pieces that are so famous and that have been played so much, and like, I think we all probably study a piece like this. If we're wanting to play classical music, we all study this at some point. We can breeze over or gloss over what we're supposed to do with these notes and how they resolve. And it happens every 2 bars. Right? 2 bars later in measure 5. Right? This is we'd almost lean into this and feel the dissonance. In a sense, we can be very careful in order to do this, but we can slightly elongate the rhythm of that first note and then slightly shorten. We're not quite doing what would be called double dotting, where we're actually changing the rhythm from dotted eighth, 16th to a double dotted eighth and a 32nd. We're not going that far, but we're alluding to maybe that could happen. And we're alluding to it because we want to hear that dissonance. And then the resolution is both of those following notes. So let me play that again with both, and listen with both of these things in mind. We're creating forward momentum and shape through each of the phrases. It's a bar and a half long, 2 bars long. And we're also going to be making sure that we listen to and emphasize that dissonance so that we can better feel the resolution. Yeah? And then we have our first real ending. Now continuing on through the piece. Yes. So we have so many options, right, to create that shape and create that interest. So this isn't just a bunch of bars of repeated notes, which it can tend to sound like because so much of the music is 3 pitches, 3 chords that repeat, right? And then so don't accidentally minimize the musicality of it by just kind of floating past and going straight past these opportunities, musical opportunities we get every 2 bars. Okay. Oh, I wrote a note about this. I wanted to make one more comment. Ellen asked, are you playing the right hand slightly after the left one? Yes, that's a stylistic choice. We could play them together. And perhaps for more emphasis, we can break them once in a while. You'll hear pianists break the downbeat apart, especially in places where we want to emphasize that musicality. We'll break the beat apart in both hands by a slight moment in time. Yeah. So great question, Alan, and good ears. David said, is that hairpin in measure 11 to indicate rubato, or is it a crescendo? That is always a great question in Chopin's music. Unfortunately, we can't know for sure which one it is, and we don't have any other markings in the piece that would point us in one direction or another. It is the only marking, and this is the Poland National Edition, so it's a good edition. We'll put it back up on the screen so we can see what we're talking about. This crescendo in measure 11, I think absolutely could be interpreted both ways or either way, and it would be very successful. I think we're very used to hearing a pullback and a rival, very likely because of that stretch in the right hand. There aren't that many pianists that could actually reach that and play it under one hand. And if we have to roll the chord at the downbeat of measure 12, like this, even with both hands, I've taught that a couple times, both hands crossing over. That can be acceptable, or something like that. If we need to roll it for musical purposes to be able to actually articulate those notes, there's no way we could propel ourselves forward. We won't have time to make that happen. The roll is always going to get in the way of that then. Yes. So because of that, I think we hear a lot of people pull back there and only take the crescendo as a dynamic marking. But if I play this again for you and I show you pushing straight through and making that an arrival, both dynamically and with rubato, a pushing forward and rubato, it is different. It's interesting, but we don't hear it that often. Here's another argument that it's a dynamic marking and not a marking of rubato. We never get one in the opposite direction, and we never get a marking that, or a retard, or any other marking that shows us to return to tempo. So a lot of times when these hairpins are considered rubato marks, we have enough around and in context that we can say, oh, here's where we push forward and here's where we pull back. Because Chopin is going to have us create a really nice, balanced rubato where we don't just push forward and never return. Right? So it's a little strange if it's a rubato mark that we wouldn't get another one and that we wouldn't get, gosh, any other marking at all in the score. Yes. So I hope that that doesn't really answer your question, David, but it gives us a lot to ponder, I think. In Rhodsey, for you, it's that you say it has to be rolled, and that's fine. That's fine. Rhodsey, I might not take quite so long while you roll the chord, just so that it's not such an extended an extended roll, right? So, can we get there more quickly? And if that means we cross the hand over, instead of going, that's very slow. Yes, so I might suggest that. And I'll show you, let me show you, in case I don't remember what finger choices you're using there, but let me show you exactly how I'm breaking that. Left hand is still exactly as marked, and then the bottom 4 of the right hand we're taking with the right hand actually, and then left hand crosses over for just that top note. Which also means we can give it a nice ping on the top. So we hear that the melody continues to that note, right? Hope that makes sense. Yes, and Antonio, we're going to talk about Michelangelo in a bit. Awesome. Okay. Oh, so Rhodsey, I had mentioned something that I was going to say, and then I got answering a couple of those questions from Alan and David. But one note that I had is about preparing to play a piece of music. This might seem like a small thing, but it can really make a difference in not only how we play the beginning of the piece, but how successful our entire performance is interpreted. And that is purely making sure that we are composed and ready to go when we strike the first note. So I know that what we do on the channel here, and we're always taking submissions from home, like everybody's at home when we're playing. We're not in a hall. There is an audience, but it doesn't feel like playing for a live audience because you get to record it in your own time and at home and do as many takes as you want, right? But I still think it's really important to know that it has a psychological impact on the viewer, and it does on you, whether you realize it or not. If we're doing something else, and then we just go and start, it almost it's very nonchalant, if you will, yeah? And it almost downplays the importance of the music if we just were in the middle and then we just like dive in and there is no preparation for it. Rather than getting yourself centered, for example, like I think you had a dog toy in your hand before you started, and I think you just like dropped it and you were talking to your dog. By the way, cute, awesome. But when you turn back to the piano, give yourself just a moment because the tone and the purpose of the first note is just as important as every other note in the piece. In fact, some would argue it's more important because we're setting the tone, we're setting the stage for everything that is to follow, right? So I know that feels like maybe a thing that we don't pay attention to often at home or in our practice or when we're filming videos at home, right? But if you can get in the habit of when you sit down to actually play through something, and the intention is to play through it, and we're not practicing a few measures or we're not practicing for a specific spot, right? Have that idea that we're going to breathe, it's going to feel like we're playing for others. It's going to feel like we're on stage. Take that moment. Think intensely about the tone you want, the dynamic you want, the hand position you want, the shape you want your attack to take for that very first note. Because it's amazing how impactful one single pitch here can be when we set it up really well, right? And in this piece, Rhodsey, I know you've played and you've written some extraordinarily more complex and complicated music than this. So especially when we have something that has relatively few notes. I know for not everybody here, you're going to feel as this has few notes. You will in a couple years, I promise. But if you've played really, really big stuff, other repertoire, this becomes even more important. How much delicacy and intimacy and and shape can we show on just a single note, the very first one of the piece. So take your time and get ready for that. And it'll be great practice composing yourself. If you do play in public anytime, we'll have a lot of practice going through that. Okay. All right, 2 more points, Rhodsey. The first is our sense of legato and our actual finger connection with these notes. You're doing a lot of just releasing and lifting the hand. And on the 3 chords, of course, we have to release the notes, right? But especially here, the next bar, I was seeing a lot of bounce, right? And of course, the pedal masks that. If we don't use the pedal, it's very obvious that are not connected. And if we do use the pedal and play it the same way, it's a little more masked, right? I'd encourage you to try to feel and choose fingerings for these thirds where we can really show a legato connection, even with fingers. So here, measure 3, the 3rd finger can just slide. So that's with no pedal, using 3, 3, 5. It can still be connected and smooth. And with the bottom of the chord, now we need to use pedal to connect the remaining ones, right? Let's go on to the next one. Here. Can we really think about staying in the keys and feeling 3, 4, 5, as if you had to play that melody without pedal? And then next bar. And even, let me make this full screen again. Even when we're playing those repeated notes, yes, like in the first bar, try not to let yourself leave and exit the keys so much, because that articulation has a different tone and has a different intention than staying in the key. So stay, and then legato. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Rhodsey, you said no, you're going to learn number 13, the F sharp major, which brings me, thanks, I love Bach. That brings me to the last point, Rhodsey, that I have for you today, and it's going to be especially important for the next one that you learn, which is be careful of our pedaling. And Rhodsey, can you tell us what edition you learned this from? I know on the video it was memorized, so great. But do you remember what edition you got? And was it a really good edition? Was it an Urtext? Was it a Schirmer or something like that? Or was it from a different publisher? I bring this up because of the pedal markings. Because Chopin did actually give pedal markings for this piece. Okay, Rhodsey, you said an edition from the 30s, maybe a Schirmer edition, or a Breitkopf and Hartl or something. Okay, I'm going to put the score back up for a second. The pedal markings that are on here, if you just ignore, I'll delete all of the other red marks that we have. Okay, the pedal marks that are on here are Chopin's. The trouble with playing these markings literally today is that our piano resonates a lot more than Chopin's piano. And so we will get a lot more blur on that dissonance. So whether it's on beat 1 or 2 bars later here, if we pedal through this dissonance, you hear how crunchy that stays? And it's still there, still crunchy by the whole time after we play those 2 bars. So it's much more common today to interpret this with pedals where we take a fresh pedal on the second beat throughout all of this, so that we are eliminating that dissonance so we can still lean into it musically, but then clear. That is a much more common interpretation. Right? Okay. So perhaps, Rhodsey, if you were just reading the pedal marks in the score you had and you were following those exactly, that could be a possible reason why it was very blurry. More blurry than you'll usually hear played. Yes, Rhodsey, technically, sure. Easy for if you're more accomplished. Yes. Those of you I know that haven't played it yet, and like Johnny, great question. I'm going to come back to that in a second. It won't be easy for everybody here, but yeah, the part that's not easy is the same bit that is not easy about number 4, which, oh my goodness, so many people play number 4 because it's so easy to play. But actually phrasing it and playing it musically is unbelievably hard. Because every single note has to be perfect, and the left hand has to be so precisely controlled. You need such an advanced technique to actually play number 4 really well. Yeah, Dith, we're back on this word easy. Yeah, so number 4, and I know number 7, and sometimes number 6, which we heard recently on the stream. Number 6 is this left-hand one, right? Dith, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, those are usually considered 4, 6, 7 are some of the first that we might play of all of the Chopin preludes. None of them are truly easy. They all present a challenge. Learning the notes, playing the notes might be easier in some than in others, but without a doubt, playing them really musically and at a really high level is still incredibly hard. Number 7 might be the easiest even to do that of all of them, because it's a little bit more straightforward. But my goodness, yeah, we can always be striving for more of that stuff. And how can we phrase better? How can we learn to connect better? That's also the reason why some of you may have seen, I did a video, maybe it was this year or last year, late last year, that the title was Why You're Never Too Good for Burgmüller Opus 100. And for those of you that watched it, you saw I played 3 examples of teaching pianists. Two hold doctorates, and one is a concertizing pianist. So very highly trained, but they were 3 very different not just interpretations. The quality of the execution of the pieces was highly variable. Because even pieces that are easy, there is still so much that we can work on. Yeah. Yes, I Love Bach said, just voicing the top note for this prelude is not easy. That's correct. And making sure to add on to that, making sure that the voicing between the hands is well thought through. And how we strike the first bass note. And then that B in the right hand needs to sit on top, right? And everything else is incredibly quiet. Yeah, great stuff. I think that covers everything, Rhodsey. So check out that pedal again. You can use this as a great warm-up, Rhodsey. Now that you know the piece, you know the notes, use it as a warm-up to think more about musicality and to think and listen to your pedal. Make sure that we aren't blurring any of those unwanted harmonies together. Yeah. Let's see, Rhodsey, you said you always look for little hidden sub-melodies. There was one that you missed in this piece. Couple measures from the end. We have this line in the bottom in the alto. So you could also work on. Rhodsey was, I wouldn't say you accented it enough. And or the juxtaposition against all of your other melodies, you didn't bring out the upper melody enough in previous measures here, so that we could hear a difference between this instead of that. Because now if we go here, if we bring out, how much we bring out another voice is completely dependent on how we have shaped things in the past. Yeah? All right, Rhodsey. Thanks. Awesome. Good stuff. Let me go back because Johnny had a question. Taking bar 2 as an example, how do you approach the dynamics? On one hand, it's the end of a phrase, but it's also the first the strong downbeat of bar 2. Great question, Johnny. So the phrase is always going to come first, the sense of phrase and the direction of where that's going. So because, here's bar 1, because that's an ending before a new beginning, we're always going to taper that, in this piece anyway. I don't think there would be any times where I'd disagree with that, unless it's an occasion where the slurs are alighted. Sometimes you'll see things like this, not in this piece, but where the next slur might begin on the same note. Occasionally we can see that. That isn't a misprint. And I think about it as, in terms of orchestration, we have instruments, for example, in an orchestra, where one ends a phrase, another begins a phrase, and they happen to share the same pitch. That would be an opportunity to do something different and to explore, how can this be a beginning? That can be much more complicated to phrase. But in this piece, the second bar of every phrase is always an end. So we don't be under the impression that we feel 3/4 in the typical way of 1, 2, 3, 1, where we accent 1, yeah, because then we'd have 1, 2, 3, 1, and we give a pulse on that. And Chopin has made sure that we're not going to do that by not continuing the left-hand pattern. It doesn't go back down, for example, like this. Which then would turn into a waltz. And I think we would naturally feel less taper at the end of the phrase. But what Chopin has done, is give us a definite ending. So, yeah, we can always think about those as tapering and showing a nice ending. So we push forward through the phrase earlier and then round off. Yes? Hello, Carrie. Hello, Bethany. Alan, I have not listened to that one. Let me see. Did I miss any questions about this? I don't think I did. I don't think I did. Yeah, my pleasure, Johnny. Okay, that'll wrap up talking about this piece. Yeah. I know, so we can basically open the rest of the time up. I know Rhodsey had to leave, but we'll all give him another round of applause. So, nice work. Hopefully he can apply what we just talked about to his next endeavor. So yeah, we can have an open session for questions pretty much the entire rest of the time, which we haven't had in a long time. I love Bach. Yes, you can submit a video, but I need them ahead of time. I can't show ones that if you submit during the stream. It would be a lot of downtime while I go and grab it and download it and other stuff. But I love Bach. There are directions to submit in the description below the video. So yeah, you can send me an email and attach a video to either Dropbox or Google Drive. Those are the two best ways. And yeah, I'd be happy to show it. Happy to talk through it. Hello, Port Mead. Oh, wait. So before or while you think of any questions that you have that we can chat about, Antonio wrote to me with a quick idea to spark some conversation. So we'll start with that, but feel free in the meantime to drop some questions. Antonio was asking about the pianist Michelangelo, and how many of you are familiar with him? He was a very famous pianist of the 20th century, Italian pianist. I think he lived from 1920 to the mid-90s or so. He's considered as great as name any of the pianists that you've heard of, David, like Rubinstein or Horowitz, any of them, the great pianists of the 20th century. He's on the list of the best of the best. So Antonio, I know you asked what I thought of his playing, and I can give a quick summary of my thoughts, but they're just my thoughts. I listened to a smattering of his work this morning, and from the smattering that I listened to, the small amount, I feel badly. I'm not judging him in any way, shape. Let's say I'm only reflecting on the 3 or 4 pieces that I listened to this morning. And so it's unfair to say that he played this way, everything this way, or that his whole life this way. I have the utmost respect for him. But it seemed like I could characterize what I heard as really, really articulate and clean playing. So I listened to him play Chopin's First Ballade, and it wasn't my preferred interpretation. I still love Zimmerman's playing of that. But it was so clearly articulated, and the pedaling was so precisely thought out and executed that there were things within the piece that I know really well, but that I've never heard played that way before. Some of the runs were still so powerful and so connected, but they were so clean and not muddied by the pedal. But yet you could tell that there was still pedal there. So it was astounding in a way, the cleanliness of it. But there were some other components. I didn't think it was as romantic as it could have been. What else did I listen to? I listened to the beginning of Gaspard of Ondine, and I felt the same way. It was extraordinarily clean, too clean. I didn't listen to more than about a minute of it because it wasn't my style of interpretation. Because it was kind of pokey, and Ondine should just be spooky and like under the water and so cloudy and amorphous, and I didn't get that from his interpretation. So I didn't listen very long. And then I listened to his Beethoven 3, which I loved, and I listened to the whole concerto. And so I think what I ended up concluding was that style of playing, that style which I'm attributing to him because of these handful of recordings that I listened to today only, really, for me, fits classical work extraordinarily well. I loved his Beethoven, but I didn't like his Ravel at all. Bethany, I know Bethany's here. I don't even remember if I mentioned this, because a month or 2 ago, Bethany played The Snow is Dancing by Debussy, and there is a recording of Michelangelo online playing that piece, and it is really good. I think it's the perfect balance of the dancing nature and the counterpoint within that piece. And it's got that remarkable, kind of like what I just described about his Chopin, that remarkable balance between pedal, like having things be so articulate, yet still connected. And so I really enjoyed his playing of that piece. I bring it up because Bethany's here, and I don't remember if I mentioned it. Parsimonious. David. It's a nice, I would have to dictionary that one. That one is not in my daily vocabulary, David. Now I see where Antonio used it. So I'm assuming, and drop the, can we copy and paste a Webster's definition of parsimonious? Bethany says, sounds like parsnips. Yes. Yes, it could have a lot to do, Antonio, with the fact that his legato is done with a lot of finger legato and less pedal. Very choosy with his pedaling. Yeah, that could have a lot to do with it. So, yeah, he's not typically on my radar as someone that I look to or look for recordings of, just because I already have a long list of pianists that I know that I usually like listening to. But, I mean, he's a wonderful pianist. So, and I think we could probably all agree that there are pianists that we love playing certain repertoire and that we don't like playing other repertoire. That's one of the remarkable things about the classical repertoire and classical music, and the fact that you can have so many wonderful pianists that do so many different things. There's an option for everybody to listen to. David said, unwilling to spend money or use resources, stingy or frugal. So stingy and frugal, or sparingly, like Antonio kind of just said. Yeah. Yeah. Very frugal use of pedal. Sure. I can get behind that. And that could definitely, I would have to see some video of him playing to grasp that a little bit better. But that would allude to what I heard on the audio only. So, Antonio, since you brought up this up, what are your favorite Michelangelo recordings? You said Debussy Preludes. I'll have to go listen to that. Do you have any others? And while we're on the topic of pianists, we've got a bunch of people here. Who are some of your favorite pianists to listen to? Yeah. Who are some of your favorite pianists to listen to? Let's see. Bethany said Lugansky. I love Bach. I don't think I've heard Lucas. I don't think I've heard him play. I'll have to look him up. Here's something. So if you follow the latest recordings, especially from Deutsche Grammophon, was it earlier this month, or I think it was in April, or was the last day of March, Trifonov and Babayan released a 2-piano album of Rachmaninoff, and I really don't like it. I was really disappointed because I kept seeing it pop up on Apple Music, and I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing, and I love the repertoire that they were playing. And I listened to it the day it came out, and it was kind of a letdown. I love, it was an album of a lot of the same repertoire, of the 2-piano repertoire by Martha Argerich and Emmanuel Axe. That is still unbeatable in my opinion. Bethany, so you just mentioned Argerich of Ravel. Wonderful. Oh, great. Yeah, lots of different choices. Yeah, I think that shows. These are all the names that are popping up. They're very different pianists, and they play with a lot of different character from one another. And you can see like how all of those different characters appeal. Like Jane just said, Angela Hewitt and Daniel Barenboim. And Daniel Barenboim seems to be one of the most I can't think of the word, but causes the most argument, at least lately for me in the last 6 months, because some people really like his playing, and it's like their gold standard. It's like, this is as good as it gets. And other people just can't even listen to a measure. And I think it's interesting that polarizing. His playing seems to be so polarizing. It's interesting. Side note, I used to live in Chicago, where Daniel Barenboim, I believe he is still the conductor of the Chicago Symphony and the artistic director. So I heard him play a number of times live downtown. And Nancy said, your husband calls him boring bov. That's funny. Oh, Gould. Yes, Gould is even more polarizing, probably the most polarizing pianist ever to live. And Alan, you enjoy Barenboim's songs without words? I do too. Oh, let me say I did. I did when I started listening to his album of Mendelssohn, and then I grew away from it. So interesting. Yeah. Let me go back. We're getting a couple more questions here. So before we get overwhelmed with questions, I want to make sure I answer these. Dith had one from a while back. Dith, sorry, we got on a tangent. This is what happens when we have time on these streams. Dith, you said you have a theme for a piece that you're working on and it's stuck in your head in B major. I don't really know my way around B, and it feels high for the sopranos, but I also don't know anything about transposition. Dith, okay, Dith, grab a copy of MuseScore or make an account, something. Get an app so you can notate some music, because with the notation program, if you want to write something in, or if you can play something in on your keyboard, you can click a button and have it transpose, which will save you a lot of time. It would be a great exercise to take something and say, okay, I need to transpose it down a third or a fourth or a fifth. That would be a great exercise to do by hand, but it's going to be time consuming. So depending on what you want to do, if you want to learn about transposition and you want to copy some of your notes and recopy them into a new key, that can be a really valuable and great exercise. But if you just like to change the notes you wrote and perhaps even hear it played back in a lower key to make some decisions, use a notation program because it's so much faster. About keys, and I know, Dith, you said you're writing choral music. There isn't... Dith, what... Do you have a particular group of people that you're writing for? Like, is it a chorus that you know is going to perform this, or are you writing choral music for the fun of it, or is it like an assignment from the teacher? Yeah, which one? Because how you treat and how you write ranges for voice types is dramatically different depending on if you know who the ensemble is and you know their level of capability, if it's going to be performed. Okay, Dith, it's a church group. And they're very good. Okay. Okay. I'll give you a couple pieces of advice, Dith. Typical soprano lines for, let's say, professional choir go up to, you could definitely write the C, what is this? C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The C2 ledger lines above the staff. A professional soprano in a professional choral group is going to sing that, and they're going to just knock it out like it's no problem. Most church groups, even good ones, are going to have a lot of trouble with that note. And a lot of times their highest pitch is going to be around the G sitting at the top of the staff. Maybe a little bit. If you've got one or two that have been highly trained or that are really, really good, you might be able to eke out in a good way. You might be able to get a couple steps higher than that. But going past G is hard for a lot of church sopranos. Okay, so Dith, you said that, well, I don't know which note you're referring to, the C or the G, but yeah, okay, it seems like you know that group pretty well. Maybe an A sharp. A sharp that's getting up there. So the question you'd want to ask about the key that you're choosing, knowing the top range, is one, is it really important for you at big moments, at the big moment, the big finale, or if we're cadencing, if you plan on writing a cadence somewhere on the one chord, and you want the first scale degree to be able to be performed by the highest voice part, the sopranos, if we're in the key of B, they need to be able to sing that high B. But the question is, do you need that? If you want that to be a choice, then yes, choose a key that fits where we can place the root at the top of the chord. There would be some other options. Let's say we're in the key of B, and we have finished with a 5 chord, and we need to resolve that. You could also write the sopranos to resolve up to F sharp. And that could sound really nice also. It's just not a perfect, authentic cadence. So there's 2 options in B. If those work, you don't need to change the key. But if one of those 2 notes, if it's really too high, then we could think about dropping things down. And again, for a color reason, if you really like the 3rd of the chord, like D sharp, I love choral music and voices singing in something like a voicing like that. Let's put it this way. Bass, tenor, alto, soprano. So 2/6 with a 5th in between. That's a really nice sounding voicing for voice. Right? And even if we are writing more than 4 parts, we'd have some really nice options like that, or like that for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-part DVC if your group is really good, right? But in B major, going back to that question of key, if you want the 3rd of the chord, you're definitely going to be relegated down the octave and not up, because that's incredibly high. So that would be a little bit of advice about key. And if you can put your music in a notation app or notation software, write what you write, show it to some of the people as you're writing it, show it to some of the singers, and you could always then transpose, hopefully, if it's just a step or 2 to help it fit certain voice types, we can transpose that. Also, be careful of how you write tenor parts. Again, because professional tenors have a range that's extraordinarily bigger than most church tenors are going to have. Most church tenors we're not going to have above like an E or an F above middle C, where a professional will have a good 5th higher than that. So it's, yeah, very different. Bachward's fellow, you said you transpose the hymn because at church, so the highest note is not above a D or an E to let the voices warm up in the congregation. That's yeah, that's very kind of you. And you have a good singing congregation if they can hit an E at all. I think then you have some good singers. All right, Dith, I hope that helps guide that. And in fact, I have written a bunch of choral music. I would love to take a look. It's not exactly what we usually talk about, but writing for choir is such a great study, and I think a lot of us here could benefit from taking a look. So if you want to send it in and we could chat about it on a stream sometime, that would be great. Okay. I know we had another question come in, so I'm searching for that. Oh, David. Hello, David. This is from David Ordonez. What are all the ways to end a song? And is cadence the correct term? A cadence, yeah. So in music, a cadence is a term to define an ending of some kind. And we don't need to go through them all, but there are lots of ways we can define endings of phrases. And that is one of the things that we were just talking about with diff. We can have, I'll give you a couple examples. In C major, we can have a perfect authentic cadence. So, where we move from the 5 chord to the 1 chord, and the first scale degree sits on the top. It's in the melody. An imperfect authentic cadence would be still from the 5 chord to the 1 chord, but without the first scale degree in the melody. So here we have 5, and then the 5th scale degree, G, is still on the top. So, those are two of a variety of ways that we can end a song. Cadence is the correct term. If we're talking in classical terms, a lot of times we're going to use the 5 chord and then end on 1. Or we're going to hear Beethoven's something like that. And you might get a minute of 5-1, 5-1, 5-1. So that happens a lot. We can also use the 4 chord. We were just talking about church music, and the 4 chord is called going from 4 to 1. So in C, this would be an F chord. Going from 4 to 1 is called a plagal cadence. Let's talk about one more. Going from the 5 chord, so still in C, the G chord, up to the 6 chord. It's called a deceptive cadence. Let's take this a step further. So we're going to slightly leave the topic of cadences, but we're going to continue talking about harmony. Yeah, thank you, Bethany. The Amen cadence. What's the plagal cadence? 4-1. Let's talk about function in harmony, because this also relates. Okay, here we go. There are 3 primary functions in harmony. Tonic, which don't get confused with the drink. Predominant and dominant. So, what do these 3 categories mean? Tonic is usually home. It's a resting place. Yes? So the 1 chord, for example, in major. 1 chord is going to be tonic function. It's also called the tonic, and the first scale degree is called the tonic. So, of course, music has to be confusing. We use some of these words multiple times and in different ways for different purposes. But these 3, the 3 that we're talking about right now, are purely to define how harmony works. Okay, tonic could be the 1 chord, for example, and it can be the 6 chord, because, like we just talked about, if we have a deceptive cadence, that still feels like we have left and we come home partially. We get a partial resolution. And one other chord that is sometimes can be considered tonic would be the 3 chord, because it shares 2 pitches. We're talking about major, I'm giving you major scale diatonic chords here. In C major, the E minor shares 2 pitches with the 1 chord. So sometimes it can also be a tonic. Let's go over to dominant. Dominant is what usually gives us the sound of a cadence, or gives us the sound of an ending. It sets up the sound of an ending. And a lot of these that I've just played for you revolve around using the 5 chord, which in C would be G, or the 5-7, which is just adding a 7, right? The thing that makes dominant harmony dominant is the addition of, or the containment of, the leading tone. Thanks, Nancy. Okay, the leading tone is the 7th scale degree. So in C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is B. B is the leading tone. The dominant chord, G, has a B in it. That containment, or the addition of that leading tone that resolves to C, resolves to a tonic, that makes this dominant function. There is another chord that is also commonly used for dominant, and that's our diminished 7. The chord built on the leading tone. Because you could hear that still has that same pull. So we can equate dominant with creating pull to lead us home. Interestingly, the 5-7, this chord, change views for a second. The 5-7 has 4 pitches, and it contains the 7 chord all by itself. So 5, 7, and 7, they both still contain the leading tone. This sounds a little more dissonant on its own than this, but they work the same way. Last little bit. Predominant. So typically we usually hear of the word like subdominant to talk about the 4th scale degree, or the chord built on the 4th scale degree is subdominant. It's the chord below the dominant, below 5. Predominant is a harmonic function. So we're going to have all of the other chords that we haven't used, like 2, and sometimes 3, more often 3, and 4, and sometimes 6. Depending on how it's approached, and depending on if those chords, 3 and 6, for example, if they're approached by a dominant, they function more like tonic. But if we approach it differently, let's say we have 1, and then we have 1 in inversion, and when we go straight to 6, that is predominant, not tonic. So let me hear the difference between that. Here's 1 inversion to 6. So 1, 1, 6, predominant. So tonic, this is called tonic prolongation. Even this would be called, in a sense, tonic prolongation if we don't go to a 5 chord. As soon as we introduce 5, now this 6 chord is no longer predominant, it's tonic, because the function of it changed, right? It is functioning as a return, it's functioning as a point of stability instead of something that's taking us further away from home. So I brought all this up. Let me throw those back on the screen because we've been talking a little bit about writing music. And the initial question was about writing endings. Most endings are preceded in classical music by the dominant chord leading to something else, leading back to a tonic. The other thing that we could do is any chord that, in a sense, ends a phrase where we obey one of the typical cadence patterns. That is going to be an ending. It might not function depending on the type of music we're talking about. Let me give you an example. Carrie, which part did you want to see with the overhead camera? Here, a very famous end of a pop song. That doesn't include the dominant anywhere. Hey, Morgan. So this is 4, 1, 6, 2, 1. It's really just a plagal cadence with some stuff thrown in the middle, right? And if you don't know, that is part of Let It Be by the Beatles. So depending on the era of music we're talking about, and their rules change. Yes. Yeah, Carrie, let me know which bit you'd like to see with overhead, unless I did it already before I saw the comment in the chat. And whose question was this? David. David, I hope I answered some of that question. It was kind of long-winded, but I hope I answered some of that and also gave you a little preview into thinking about harmony and kind of how it works and how we can lead from one point to another point. Yeah, Carrie, yeah. Okay. So Carrie asked about going through those cadences again with subdominant or maybe the predominant showing. I'll show both of those. So this was going from 1, so in C. Everything's in C. 1 to a 1-6, which would be C in first inversion. And then I threw in a 7 to make it, give it a little dissonance. And then 6. This is 6, 7. There's regular 6. Let me keep them just triads. 1, 1, 6, 6. So this would be tonic prolongation, as we'd call it. And the 6 would not be a cadence. We would continue on and write more music, or there would be more, because you can hear that doesn't sound like an end unless I pause. Whereas if we do 1, 1, 6, 5, and then 6, all we did was throw one extra chord in, and the function of 6, the AA chord, changed. It changed from predominant or prolonging the sense of tonic. That's a really advanced concept to understand, so it might be causing some confusion. That's prolongation with no cadence. This, tonic, or tonic really predominant, dominant, tonic. Because now the 6th chord has come after 5. And tonic, remember, is it's an ending, it's home. It's where we're very comfortable and it feels very consonant. It feels like a return. Anything that does not feel like a return is not going to be tonic. Hope that helped, Carrie. Oh, yes. Yes. Awesome. Let's see, catching up on the chat. I don't think, there might be something else that came in. Yeah, Dith said about accompaniment for the choral piece. Absolutely, that would be great. I feel like I missed a question. Awesome. And Alan, yeah, great. Alan said, you love the theory discussions when you can actually hear what's happening. Yes. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Johnny had another question about going back to Chopin's pedal markings. Yes. Okay. So let's hit that really quick. Johnny asked, with pianos being different back then, should one's playing style differ based on piano type? Great question. And yes, the answer is yes, because, and specifically we're talking about pedal. Absolutely, yeah, that'll change depending on a lot of factors. There might be a lot that changes, but we'll stick with pedal for right now. So yes, the bigger the piano that we have, the bigger the acoustic piano, typically, especially in the bass region, the longer it takes for the piano to stop ringing and for the dampers to work, right? And that's one of the things that makes concert grands so amazing, is they sustain for such an incredibly long amount of time. It would be far more than what my piano does, which is great already, right? Let's get out of C major. There we go. Okay, so stuff in the low end is going to be dampened by a smaller piano, faster, and it's going to change how we pedal. It's going to change how long we need to have the pedal released. on a really big 9-footer, if we're playing big chords, we're going to need to have the pedal released a lot more often and for longer, because those notes will tend to continue to ring. And as great as they're designed and as big as the dampers are inside a 9-footer, there's still no match for the amount of vibration that the string has. And when a damper drops on a string that's going crazy, what happens is it kind of throws the damper around before the damper actually comes to rest. So, yeah, that's one instance in which pedal changes. Another instance, sure, let's go the opposite direction. You might find that on like a really little baby grand, or on a spinet especially, like the smallest of uprights, you're going to get away with having the pedal down a lot more than you would the bigger the piano gets. So there's another way we can, and if let's say we're trying to give a wonderful performance on a spinet, we're trying to do the best we can, we're going to be having the pedal down more and for longer periods playing a piano like that than if we're playing a big concert grand. The other thing that really affects pedal choice in particular is the space that you're playing in. So if we're playing at home, usually we're playing in a pretty small room, and the sound isn't resonating for a long time. It's usually getting dampened by the walls and by the other stuff in the room that's around us. Go into a hall, and the sound is the acoustics of the hall are built to help send the sound off the stage and help everybody in the hall hear it naturally without amplification, right? So halls, even dry halls, we're going to end up using less pedal because the hall is naturally creating blur. And the bigger the hall is, to a point, the bigger the hall is, the less pedal you need to use, because what people hear ends up coming from all over the place. It can be really actually more difficult to play something like, if let's say we want something extremely cleanly played and we aren't using any pedal. Let's say it's something like Bach or Scarlatti, and we want that. We want the audience to hear that in a big space. That's really hard to do. It would be much easier to perform something like that, and the audience to get that intimate sense of sound if the space is no bigger than 100 seats or 200, not 1,000 or 2,000. So, I lost your question, Johnny, but I know it was somewhere up there. I think I touched on everything. But yes, long story short, yes, how we pedal changes depending on the circumstance and depending on the instrument. For those of you that practice on digitals, you don't have to change that. You might change it if you change the patch. You might change that. But the more and more that we study, and the more opportunities you have to play in various places, the more that actually becomes part of something that you study and that you work on. And it even changes, for example, like if you're going to solo with orchestra, you're probably going to use a lot more pedal than if you weren't. If you were playing, let's say you're playing a concerto, and a lot of times, this is a great example, a lot of times when you compete to get an opportunity to play a concerto live with orchestra, you have to play the 2-piano version because obvious reasons. Not everybody, unless you're in the Clyburn, do you get an opportunity before you win to play with orchestra. So usually those resources are spent for the winner, right? And in the meantime, the way you're going to give a successful performance of a 2-piano version of a concerto is going to be much different. And it's probably going to be in a different space too. It's not going to be in the hall where the orchestra plays. It's probably going to be in a small recital hall, 2 pianos. There is going to be a microscope on your playing. Every tiny little thing is going to be heard. If you happen to win, honestly, your job playing with orchestra is going to be so much easier, because a lot of times we can use a lot more pedal. We can get away with a multitude of sins, as my teacher used to say. And not just get away with it, but actually the pedal, having the pedal down for longer, helps the piano to project more and be more competitive with your orchestra that's 80 members that you have to dynamically balance, or you have to work to dynamically balance, right? And the bigger your dynamic is, the more the orchestra can play out, and the more satisfying it's all going to be for the audience. Great question. Oh, awesome. Jane, I see your question, Jane. If taking Skype lessons or virtual lessons, is it a good idea to have an exterior mic rather than the mic from the computer? It can be. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And you don't even need to spend a whole lot of money. So, for example, the Blue Yeti is a great USB microphone. It's like, it was around $100. A couple of my virtual students have that, and it definitely sounds better, and it's easier to critique from my perspective when they have an option like that. A secondary option, especially if you're not playing an acoustic instrument, but you're playing a keyboard and you're tech savvy enough to figure it out, a secondary option is getting the feed from your digital right into Skype or Zoom or whatever platform that you use. I have a student that does that also, that doesn't mic up his piano, or that used to mic his piano and he had an acoustic and now has changed to using the digital output. And it's super clear, it's super clean, really easy to hear on the feed to me. So those are always two great options. I have found that using mics on like a tablet or a phone, especially if they're newer, they tend to be better. If you're using an internal mic, the mics on a tablet or phone tend to be better than mics on laptops and on things like an iMac, like a semi-desktop computer. In those cases, for example, in a laptop, even a USB like webcam that has a built-in microphone, a lot of times even those microphones are better than what you get in the device. So I hope that helps. The Blue Yeti is a great choice. There's actually a video here on the channel that goes through, I think, like 8 or 10 different USB microphones specifically for use in piano lessons. So Jane, if you haven't seen that, you might be interested in it. If you Google USB mic for piano, or you put it in the search bar, fingers crossed that you'll find it. I can't remember exactly the title of the video. Yeah, great question. Carrie, you say, random question. Okay, what is the size of your room and your piano? You're shopping now and looking at a Kawai GX2 in a 14 by 13 room. The GX2, do you remember what size that is, Carrie? It's in the 5s, I think, right? Low to mid 5-foot range. By the way, the GX pianos are lovely. They are the next in line after my instrument, which is an RX series. This piano was made in 1999, and I think it was 2000, I don't remember. It was around 2005, I think they switched to the GX line. Maybe it was even later than that. So, by the way, Kawai GX2 is a great instrument. This piano is an RX5. It is 6.5 feet. It's pretty big. And Carrie, you said just under 6, like 5'10". Okay, yeah. 14 by 13, no, that'll be a good fit in a room like that. Now, the room I'm in is... I'm going to say something I've never said before on a stream. I don't think I have. I am actually, this studio that you see is in my house. And I look behind the camera at the kitchen in the house. So basically, I am set up like in the great room. So it's kind of an open layout. So sonically speaking, the room ends up sounding like it's about 30 feet long away from me this way, which is big, and maybe about 15 to 20 feet across this way. So it ends up being a pretty big space. And the piano, I've always played pianos in tiny rooms. If any of you have been to a music school where they have practice rooms, you'll know like you get a 6.5 foot piano in an 8x8 room, tiny room with a big piano that puts out a lot of sound. And so I'm very used to hearing instruments kind of loudly in a space. But they're definitely, Carrie, in your situation, the GX2 in a room that size would be perfect. It would be great. You'll still get a really nice sound out of it. It'll feel big, which I think is always a good thing. It'll feel big, but not overwhelmingly big. Like if you tried to put a concert grand in a room that size, you would play everything on the piano to pianissimo side of what the instrument can do because it makes so much sound. And I think for those of you that are wondering about Carrie's question, that's the crux of the question, is how do we pair the size of an instrument with a room? So, yeah. And secondarily, Carrie, I think, the GX2 is going to be a good size. I usually don't, right around the 6 foot mark for a grand piano is where I kind of cut off the want for a grand. If we start to go too much smaller than a 6 foot grand in length, a really nice upright can sometimes be a better choice. So especially on the low end of 5 foot, and definitely if you're in the 4 foot piano range, like get a really good upright. It's going to be a better investment, and it's actually going to sound better too, because there are such compromises in the design to cram a baby grand down to such a small size. There are compromises that we don't have to deal with if we deal with a nice upright, at least tonally speaking. Yeah. Okay. Ellen, you have a question. Yes. And you say, if you can play long runs in 16th notes, so like Beethoven and Clementi, but you can never play all those runs with an even tempo or consistently. Okay, or phrases with repeated notes, like the end of Beethoven's Sonatina in F. I don't think I have those Beethovens, but we can talk about some other types of runs. Let's pull up Clementi. Clementi is fun. And we'll look at a Clementi that I don't think we have looked at on the stream before. This is Opus 36, number 3. I like that one. Okay, so playing runs consistently and even repeated notes. So we have some repeated notes in here also. Alan, did you say, is this Opus 36 number 3 is the one that you're working on? Great. Oh, by the way, Carrie, awesome. Great to see you. Thanks for tuning in. Okay. Alan, first things first, let's try to diagnose and figure out where the little hiccups are happening, especially if they're happening in the same place in a run over and over and over again. So, in this sonatina, here we are. Let's look at the second measure. Second measure into the third measure, we have a run of 16th notes in a perfectly represented C major scale. And then we get some repeated notes. So we almost get a little bit of both problem spots in one micro phrase, if you will. Okay, so can we identify, are there spots where every time through we have the same hiccup? The typical place would be the cross of the thumb under, where we'd miss it or we slam the thumb. Another typical spot would be if we miss the fourth finger instead of getting a nice strong attack on that So I would take a passage like this. This is one of the few times that I think the rep is already working on a scale, so we don't need to take it outside of the rep to practice something. So take it very slowly and yeah. Let's see if we can feel a drop on every finger, every note, a drop of equal weight. So we're going to forget about the legato mark right now. We're going to forget about smooth connection because we want to make sure that the articulation of every finger and of every note is accurate and is consistent. So starting from the bottom of the scale. That was the second half of the bar. It's just a C major scale, but look at how slow that is. And also, look at what's happening here in the arm. There's a little bit of a preparation and then a strike from the arm down with the wrist that acts like a cushion. So we're not too static and only on the keys, because that can easily lead to inconsistency in playing. So we're focusing on generating the force actually from further up in the arm. And you can try to think about this one of two ways. Some teachers would call this a drop of arm weight. The trouble that I have with thinking exactly that is when we think about dropping, we tend to disengage the fingers. Yeah. So we don't want to do that. So we could think about this as drop, which is it's a healthy way of thinking about it, but we want to make sure our fingers stay active. And we want to make sure that our wrist is not locked while we just drop. That's not good either. So freedom of movement in the wrist and in the arm, but allowing the movement to start from up higher. So we're using a bigger part of the mechanism. The other thing that you can do that's similar to this, practice this scale in the piece and practice your scales by themselves in rhythmic groupings or in long, short patterns especially. So notice how I'm still incorporating the same technique. We're not focusing on legato line or connection. We're focusing on the drop or the attack from further up the arm, even on the fast note. So long, short, long, short, long. Yes? Flip that around. So now we have two sets of rhythms for those 16ths. We have long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, and we have short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Yeah, Faye said swinging. And the crisper, so yeah, right now I'm doing almost a perfect swing. We could make it even crisper because swing is almost a feel of triplet, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Instead of that, let's make it even crisper and think about these as having subdivisions of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now the long note has 3 microbeats. The short note gets 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. How fast can we push the tempo while we do that? Can we flip again? So we have the short one first. Great. Okay. Still through all of that, attacking from further up the arm. Okay. Also, every time I'm going through this, it's forte. So we're feeling free to sink in and play. We're not trying to hold back. All right, at that point, after you've gone through all of that, let's then try to add smoothness back in. But, yes, Alan said staccato. Think about it differently than staccato. I've had a couple of my students also get confused with that. there's a difference between, let's talk about 3 articulations. We have legato, fully smoothly connected. Of course, there are even multiple types of legato, but let's just say legato, smoothly connected. Staccato is very short. That's staccato. What we want to do is something in the middle. So detached is what I usually call it. So listen to how we still stay in the key. We're just not trying to connect it to the next note. But unlike staccato, we're not in a rush to get out of the key, which is staccato. Staccato has we approach staccato with the idea that we're probably going to pull away, right? Whereas in legato, we stay in the key. At least that's the problem with legato playing, and that's the problem with why legato playing can turn inconsistent, is because we're not doing enough, which is where all of these ideas that I've just showed you have come from. When we play smoothly, we're probably not doing quite enough in the rest of the mechanism to create strong enough and crisp enough articulation for all of the rest of the notes. So now we're playing detached, not staccato. Notice that detached has no up motion. It is down, release, down, release, down, release, down, release. Release is just the release of the key. Release. Staccato would be down, up, right? Those are very different. So that's an important distinction. I'm glad you asked about that. And, Gel Zorro, I like that. Detached, you say like 75%, and staccato is more like 50%. That's interesting to think about. So yeah, Alan, if that helps you too, you could think about that also. From a mechanical perspective, detached is only the down motion with nothing else. So that's why it's not staccato, because staccato is 2 motions. Okay. So now, after we've done all that detached work, both forte in consistent rhythm, plus all of the rhythmic groupings, yes, and then we're going to go back and make it legato. But notice, after you do this, do you see there are still little micro pulses left? So let me go a little bit more slowly first again. You can see the wrist just has these little bounces in it. The faster we go, the less you're going to see those bounces. But a lot of them are still in there. They're just happening over a tiny amount of space, but they've been built in, and they're helping me to especially articulate, for example, 4. Okay, that brings me to the last thing about this scale, or any scalar passage. If we have a point where a typically weaker finger is getting hung up, or there's a finger, let's say there's a finger for whatever reason, it's not articulating, and it's always soft. It's always soft. Take a moment, and we're going to create a grouping around that one spot. So let's say in this scale, it's on the B that's at the top of the scale. Now, I'm going to pause on the note that's causing problems, on the note that is usually the note that isn't sounding as much. I'm not only going to pause there, but I'm going to accent it. So I want to overemphasize the physical motion so that I create a good articulation. Sometimes I characterize this for students as thinking about a pendulum swinging. So in our practice, we want things in balance and in equilibrium. We'll call that when the pendulum is in the middle and it's not on either side. But in order to truly get it in the middle and at equilibrium, meaning all of our technique is balanced and working well and our musicality is too, we identify a problem. The pendulum has swung too far in one direction. In your case, what you're describing is that it is inconsistent. In order to rectify that, we can't just bring it back here. We have to push to the other side. So we need to go overboard. We need to over-exaggerate the motions required to execute what we're trying to do. And then we learn how to take, so here, this is our goal. Here's where this is our goal. I think I went this way. Here's where we are. Here's where the problem is. We need to move this way and push everything, over-exaggerate it this way, and then learn how to let it relax back to the middle. That's the goal. If we only try to push from the problem to the middle, we're never going to get here. We're never going to get it truly working. It's always going to end up being somewhere close, but not quite. So that's why we went through those rhythmic groupings. That's why we do detached playing. That's why it's forte, regardless of the dynamic that's in the piece. Forte. We're trying to over-accentuate the activity in the finger and the activity from the arm and the cushion of the wrist. And then we add up all of that stuff, and then we say, okay, I've practiced it all. And then we try to play it again. Not that fast, but eventually we get to the point where we stop thinking about that. We've done a lot of work on technique, and we say, I'm going to play it. This is the run. I've practiced it. I'm going to make a nice shape. Yeah? Alan, I hope that helps. Let's see. You say you have that problem in measure 14. Okay. Here is just one extra suggestion, Alan. The trill, I think you have to play it with 2 and 3, which is good. It's not the easiest finger choice, but they're among the easier ones. Get used to stinging the first note of the trill. It's going to sound great. It's going to be in historically correct interpretive context, and it's going to help you, once again, release into the first note. Right? So that the rest of the trill is not coming from a place where we're already low and we're trying to start without a preparatory motion, where we just play. That's hard, and that's going to cause tension buildup, especially coming from the 16ths. If we just try to rotate back and forth, it's okay, but it's still hard. But what if instead we use that rotation to throw, in this case, the third finger into the first note of the trill? So we're creating a lot of energy. We're letting the wrist relax. We have that preparatory motion, and the rest of the trill will start to feel like it just kind of trickles out of that first strong attack really nicely. Yes, good, Alan. Yeah, I'm glad I explained that, because otherwise I guess it's a little. I'm talking about the pendulum. Your comment about the pendulum, because otherwise I think it would be hard to understand. Why are we shifting things out of what is written on the page? There are a couple, and I know a lot of people that tune in here, you probably do a lot of research online and a lot of places. There are a couple famous teachers that are out there on YouTube right now that teach never playing anything other than how you want to perform it. So, having the end performance in mind, having the end interpretation in mind, and the end tempo, and trying to never do anything that's outside of that realm. And if you've come across that advice, it's good at a point in time. It's good when you can actually accomplish that, which is usually, and almost all the time I hear that presented, it's from a teacher that works exclusively with extremely high-level students. Students that are 20 years into playing, that they're already playing the massive repertoire. That's a very different lesson. And telling that to somebody has a very different impact on someone like that than if we're nearer the beginning or the middle of our journey playing music. So, and if it's any consolation, Alan, also, I still use rhythmic groupings. If I'm working on something that's Really, really challenging bit, I'll use rhythmic groupings. If I'm working through a Chopin etude, either that I haven't learned or haven't played in a long time, I still use rhythmic groupings. Yeah, it makes the learning process so much faster. All right. That was a great question. We're actually going to wrap up here pretty soon. Sometimes these streams go for like 2.5 hours, but I have another thing I have to get to after this, so we're going to try to wrap up here in about 10 minutes. Yeah, absolutely, Alan. My pleasure. Joel Zorro, let's see. Doesn't Zimmerman learn 3 to 4 different fingerings for each piece he wants to perform? That might also be true. Yes. And that is another thing that I have come across a handful, a very small number of pianists that do that, and that are able to do that, because it's once again, it's having such a variety of ways of executing a passage built in us, so that it's really so that I think if something goes wrong in performance, or if we misplace a finger, we have a couple pre-practiced ways to still get through the passage where it's not going to fall apart because we only have one way of getting through it. That's valuable when you're at that point, I think, of playing kind of at the pinnacle of what piano performance is, the pinnacle of music performance. That can be helpful. In the meantime, I've seen students that try to follow something like that. If they don't have the experience to go along with it, it ends up causing a bigger problem. Because you end up getting in a stressful situation, and now you have 3 or 4 choices. You have 3 or 4 paths to walk down, and we end up not being able to choose one. Or they get mixed up. The wires get crossed mid-performance. And then it actually turns into an even bigger disaster than it would have been if we had just stuck with one to begin with. So I think that can be a bit of a dangerous piece of advice. Similar to what we just talked about, it's wonderful when you're playing kind of at the pinnacle of what's capable, and before that, I would really question I would question throwing it into a student's vocabulary. Nancy, let's actually talk about this. Nancy's last comment, and this will be, I think we'll call it a day at this point. So Nancy said a bit of advice I found early on that I now think was unhelpful was to never use pedal when practicing. I would agree that never using pedal is a bad thing. But it's still really valuable to reserve time in your practice to check yourself without the pedal. So sometimes when we come across advice, depending on where it's coming from, there might be a bias built in to that advice, right? So it might not be pure of intention. Here, let me give you an example of one of mine, because I'm guilty of this too. I did a video on, I said, stop changing fingers when you're repeating notes. And that was the title of the video. And there were a couple people that got really mad at me for saying that. And they ended up not watching the video. They just logged on to comment on my title and said some not nice things. And then, okay. They never actually watched the video, which was truly about asking yourself why you're doing what you're doing. But point aside, I'm guilty of that. I made a really strong statement because in context of teaching, I find that people generally follow one thing without thinking about it. So, when for release is printed 3-2-1, 3-2-1 over and over again, why are you playing 3-2-1? Is there a reason? Well, there probably is, right? But the reason and the necessity for every different pianist to do that or not do it is completely different. Okay. Let's... Okay, I'm going to pull up a little of Chopin's first Ballade, which will bring this a little full circle for us, because we talked about it earlier today. Talking about pedal and practice. We'd think, okay, well, we're playing this romantic piece of music, and it's really advanced, and, well, we should always be using the pedal in practice, right? So that's the piece. Well, a couple measures later, or a second page. Let me get that right for you. That's a little bit better. Okay, so. Oh, you can't see my iPad. Let me try that again. We'll see if it turns back on for us. There it is. Okay. Okay, so it's the middle line that's in question. This is a challenging little bar. Right? Okay, if I'm going to sit down and practice this, I'm going to do just as much practice playing with the pedal like I've just kind of shown you. Because I want to hear what that's going to sound like. But if I really, truly want to practice and hear, are each of my fingers articulating the notes at the dynamic I want? Are they the right, in the right rhythm? Are they exactly, is it exactly how I intend this to go? Ooh, I just learned something, and maybe you heard it too. Because without the pedal, I found one or two fingers that were inconsistent in that passage. And they were right around that point. Without the pedal, that was exposed. I could hear it, and I learned I need to work on that. With the pedal down, though, let's say I'm just going to blaze through this so that a mistake happens. There was one note that was completely lost. Completely lost. And I don't even remember which one it was anymore. But with the pedal down, we just kind of went through it, and oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. Yes, Faze, don't pay attention to my grouping. It's because I'm kind of reading it. I would practice it to perform it differently, yes. But all without pedal, I can really focus in on that stuff, and I can hear what needs the work. I can actually figure out what to practice. And that is still a reason to not use pedal occasionally when we're practicing, especially if we have a passage that we want to even out, and we really want to hear that, and we don't want the pedal to cloud what we're doing. Or if we're working on, let's say, making the most beautiful melodic line, maybe we won't pedal that when we practice a few times here and there, because we want to hear what exactly are my fingers and my arm doing without letting anything else get in the way. We want to focus just on that tone, on that sound, and on that connection. So, but the flip side, going back, Nancy, let's say to something that I see more often with earlier pianists, beginners, intermediate players, is we actually probably need more work pedaling and discovering how to pedal and how to think about pedal and how to use it than we do the opposite. So it goes back to how we started this discussion. There's value on both sides. So knowing when to employ the use of pedal and why we're doing it and the pedaling choices we're making, that's important. But also being able to take the pedal away in short little bursts so that we can really identify problems in practice is another great tool. I've been wanting to do a video on that. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So I hope that, Nancy, I hope that was interesting. I hope that was interesting for everybody. Oh, okay. we're going to wrap up. It's been a great session. Oh, so Nancy, that is, see, once again, your comment, Nancy, just now is you were hurting yourself by not releasing the keys. So what ended up happening was that not pedaling still exposed an issue. In this case, it's a technique issue that after we play, it doesn't take any effort to continue to hold that key down. That's a technical thing that we can work on. Because even if we're playing without pedal and we still want to play legato, we shouldn't have that problem. Right? So once again, the not pedaling thing was helpful and hurtful at the same time, right? It was helpful in that it actually showed you something that wasn't going well. It was also not great because perhaps, in a sense, the lack of pedal may have partially caused the problem to begin with. It's all very interesting how complex the mechanics are and how they relate to what we hear and how they sometimes change without us knowing it. Christopher, thanks so much. It's great to see you, Christopher. I haven't seen you on a stream in a bit. And thanks for the super. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to call it a day. Wonderful session. As always, if you'd like to submit submit a video or a question, there is a link, or there's at least a little bit of a description on how to do that below the video. We always take masterclass submissions. Oh, thanks, Nancy. Yes, a lot of composers knew that, yes. And thanks, Nathaniel, for being here. Faze, Alan, yes, awesome. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And hey, this stream marks 2 years since Pianist Academy started. Maybe some of you saw my post in the community tab, but it was about 2 years and a week since I posted the first video here. So things are cool. Thanks everybody for being a part of the community. I appreciate it, and I always enjoy seeing all of you. And I know I get to talk, but at least you get to chat back. Awesome. And Dith, yeah, thanks Dith, and David, Gelzoro, awesome, great. I will see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks, David. See you all in 2 weeks. Practice smarter, not harder. And I'll see you next time.